Welcome back, my friends, to the Marc Clair Show, episode 9. We've made it. I barely made it anyway. It was a struggle. I'm not going to lie. It was a struggle to crawl to the microphone today. I just had a minor surgery a couple days ago. No big deal. The surgery actually wasn't the problem. It's the very strong meds that they gave me to recover with. So it was not easy, to get out of bed, crawl to this microphone, record this intro for you. But record it I had to for a number of reasons. One, I've got a hell of a conversation with my friend Monica Perez of Deep Dives with Monica Perez. It's a fantastic talk. You're going to love it. Patrons, subscribe stars, Rockfin premium subs, they already enjoyed it. They already enjoyed. Look, I told you it was a struggle, guys. The extended premium version of this episode, which of course has already been available for a week or so for premium subs. And I got a sponsor. My sponsors need love, but my sponsor is the reason I'm able to get here. It's the reason I was able to get to this microphone. Fox & Sons Coffee. It was my inspiration. I opened that bag. I took one whiff, brewed this puppy up, and here I am recording my intro for today's episode. So enjoy this conversation with Monica Perez. Enjoy a fine dark blend, the Den Blend Dark. That's my favorite at foxandsons.com. You can now use discount code MCS for Marc Clair Show. Use discount code MCS for 15% off your order over at foxandsons.com. This is truly the way that I do actually literally start my day, with a cup of Fox & Sons. So check them out and enjoy my conversation with the great Monica Perez. With me today, she is, as far as I'm concerned, at least, the internet's or the podcast world's foremost expert on propaganda. I'm very pleased to welcome, I almost said welcome back, but it's your first time on this show, the host of Deep Dives with Monica Perez. She is Monica Perez. Welcome.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be on your new show.
Well, it is a pleasure, Monica. And I think I last interviewed you a couple years ago on Lions of Liberty. And at the time, one of the most interesting things about you was the fact that you were allowed on the radio while saying all the crazy things you were out there saying. That did eventually change. So maybe you can just update us. We kind of crisscross each other as well. I left California. You actually moved to California. So why don't you just update everybody, or for the first time, I guess, since maybe there are actually new listeners to me too, on your last couple of years, all these changes that have been going on for you.
So I was a radio host in Atlanta on WSB, which was the #1 news talk radio in the country. And I had a weekend show for 8.5 years. And I only pulled a few punches. I would never say anything I didn't believe was true. I think, I don't think I went too much into 9/11. And when I first started that show, I didn't believe 9/11 was an inside job. It was only later that I realized that. And I didn't really pull too many punches, but I absolutely never misallocated blame or anything. I always said what I thought was right, with the exception of not really wanting to offend anybody. And Atlanta being in the heart of the CDC country, I feel like my COVID stuff just went too far, because in February 2020, I was playing on the air. February 2020, the first cases, I was playing on the air excerpts from the Event 201 simulation. And people, it was like War of the Worlds. People were screeching to a halt in the streets, saying 6 million people are dead. And I'm like, no, not yet.
Remember Orson Welles? I'm doing one of those I really wrote it.
Yeah, I stopped playing the clips in the middle of the show. And then
those clips, just for people that might not be familiar with Event 201, those were clips from fake radio broadcasts from a simulation about the possible pandemic that just happened to start to be 2 months before the actual.
Right. This was in October 2019, and it was about a novel coronavirus that would shut the world down for 18 months. That would make the stock market go down by 40%, literally on that day. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the day that Event 201 predicted. And it was just, so when people were saying there was a 2-week lockdown, I was like, no, it's 2 years. Listen to this. And at the same time, I had started doing a daily podcast, Deep Dives, on my former show, which is the Propaganda Report. And I had this producer on the radio who's like, oh my gosh, I love your podcast. It's fantastic. Bring that. And I was like, really? But it's so, edgy for this crowd. He's like, no, it's great. So these things all happened in February of 2020. And I think
be careful what you wish for, because that's some timing for them to tell you to ramp it up.
I know, but he was a really good guy. And he's not even there anymore because the station changed so much. But I think one of my last shows, or the show before I got fired, I hit on 9/11, Boston Marathon bombing. I mean, I think I even hit like JFK, every single thing, plus the
Just firing it all off.
Yeah, because I was just like, oh, really? You want the real me? And I mean, by the end of the week, I got a call like they're taking the Monica Perez show off the air. And I was like, wow, like 8.5 years, like I have said some crazy stuff. Like, what the heck? No explanation. There was new management. And we had talked a lot about Jeffrey Epstein. We talked about election integrity. It could have been anything. But
there's a long list, I'm sure.
That was it. But I had kind of worried about the new owners anyway. So that's why my sidekick Binkley and I started a daily show, because I was like, they're training me for a radio show. But at this point, it's not going to happen. When it was a family-owned business, maybe not anymore. So, and that was great because for 2 years or almost 3, we did the Drive Time News Blast, which was completely modeled after headlines. And so you did not have to listen to the regular radio where it had a lot of agenda. You could just go through what the mainstream media, that's why I was called the propaganda reporters, what the mainstream media was saying, but why were they really not for the reason they're telling you. And that, I think, got a lot of people through the whole lockdown period, which, yes, by coincidence, because of my husband's job, we moved out to LA around that time. And it was so much worse than living in Georgia. Like, Georgia would have been awesome to go through. And
I think Georgia came out of lockdown even before Florida did.
Yeah. Oh, maybe. Yeah. I mean, it
was like 2 or 3 weeks. And they were like, all right, that's over.
Totally traumatizing to my family, but we, made us stronger. And I used to get a lot of emails saying, like, if it weren't for you kind of telling us not to completely panic, or at least we're not crazy and seeing things that seem, well, when he says trust the science, like, why not just why doesn't the science just prove it to me? Why do I have to trust it? And I think we got a lot of people through that, but it just doing a daily show was really, I couldn't do it anymore. I've got other obligations, and my family just needed a little more attention. So, but I feel like we all got each other through that period. And now I kind of took a step back. Maybe someday I'll be able to do a daily show again. And I just do 1 or 2 deep dives a week. So I'll do like 45 minutes on a subject. So I did FTX. I did Rishi Sunak, the new prime minister of the UK. Like, I'll just take one thing and really try to get to the bottom of it. Plus I do like these, a lot of interviews, and I interview other people. So I'm keeping my toe in the water, but it's not like it was. I mean, I definitely was doing 6 shows a week, if you were, more than 1 a day sometimes. And, but there was so much going on. And plus Trump was hilarious. So it was super entertaining. And now it's just depressing.
Do you miss doing the radio show at all? Or is it kind of something that you knew, like, there's somebody with an axe back here that's going to end this thing at some point? So at least you're sort of free from that feeling, maybe.
It's a great question that nobody asked. Like, I was completely relieved. In 8.5 years, however, hundreds of shows, not a single show went by that I was not literally sick with nerves before the show. Sick. And
like, is this going to be the day? Is this going to be the one? It was
just awful. And it wasn't about getting through the show. It was a 3-hour show. It was just about the show starting. Like, I just want to throw up in the right. Trash can. And it was a relief after that. However, now I always knew this was a loss, but I'm really, it's a real loss in that there were 2 elements to that show that you cannot get on podcasting. One was that you were reaching people who were just there for news, traffic, and weather. So you were reaching tens of thousands of people. I mean, if I filled in during the week, it would be hundreds of thousands of people this one triumph we had was I had Catherine Bernard on the show, who you may know from libertarian circles, but she's
I'm aware of her.
Yeah. So she was fighting no-knock raids, and I happened to be filling in for Eric Erickson one night, and I had her on, and over the weekend, the tide turned and it did not pass. And Georgia would have been a place where it would pass because I was hundreds of thousands of people listening. We just said, call in. And I feel, I don't have proof of it, but I feel like that was very effective. And you're never getting that because radio is a push and podcasting is a pull. A pull. Like, people will pull the podcast to themselves, but the other was a push. And the other thing that really I have to figure this out, because when you do that, especially in what I would argue may be the most diverse city in the country, you get people to call who disagree.
Hmm.
And then you get that debate. So you have other people bringing up the points that they get from CNN or mainstream media, or even their own thinking, their own expertise. I got so much. I mean, it was so WSB was like, I can't. They always told me like the African American community does not listen to WSB in Atlanta. It's like half the people, and more than half my callers were African American, and they
listen to Monica.
Yeah, they listen because I was saying stuff that was obviously true, and what it revealed was that how people are portrayed by the mainstream media, by people who don't represent them, by as one of my listeners called the method activists. They get out there and they are not actually represent. I mean, have one show totally hijacked by liberal blacks in Atlanta who were against reparations. Like they just kept calling, like this would be bad, this would be bad, this would be bad. You will never ever hear that, and that's what I think is that's what I miss. And although that was like the most nerve-wracking part, like having people call you who didn't agree with you, that I feel like was where the value lied. And I actually believe that's why they cannot have diversity in radio at all. And when I got there, I was told by that same producer that I was the only person who did not screen out Ron Paul callers. And this was like,
you screen them in.
Yes.
Yeah,
this
the
was
opposite.
in 2012 when he won Iowa. This was a conservative radio station. I mean, not that time, but later, Rush Limbaugh was the main show there, and
so if someone calls in and says, "Hey, I'm a Ron Paul guy," they'd be like, "Okay, thank you." Click.
Yeah, and they would like listen for you. People would learn eventually. Don't say you're a Ron Paul guy, but they would listen for those kind of arguments. If you had a good screener, he could screen that person out, and that's what they did on purpose. And I mean, I'm not naming names because I don't know who it was, but my understanding was it was universal, and I embraced that, obviously, and that's why you just can't have diversity on the radio, I don't think.
Yeah, well, I mean, like podcasting is a fantastic platform where you can really find your people and build your community. But I suppose the downside of that is that it's less likely that you're going to stumble. Like if someone gets through all of this interview we're going to do today, it's not that likely that they're going to be a dissenting opinion and that they're going to call in and you're only going to get the people that probably pretty much, maybe they don't agree with every word we say, but they're on our wavelength if they're putting that much time into it, where you're just not going to get that randomly normies come across hearing you say something crazy and create that dynamic that you really do only get with radio.
Yes. And I will say that is, so what I feel like the mission for me now is to concentrate on delivering information in like a sane and orderly way that has some documentation. That was one thing I really learned on the radio was people were reading the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times and listening to Fox and listening to Rush. And I had to be prepared for all of that and bring my own view, and I would have to support my view. Whereas people were just reading articles from the Wall Street Journal could just say, I read in the Journal this morning. I can't do that. I read on Natural News this morning. Like that doesn't work.
Right.
You have to
Infowars.com reported that.
Right. And I used to use Infowars, but then I would have to back it up. And I can do that. So I feel like now what I want to do with like deep dives is to give information and let all the people out there, because I did build up a pretty good audience, then they use that at their holiday table. And that's something else they taught me at radio. They were like, your goal is for someone to come in the house and sit down to dinner after they just listened to your show and say, you know what Monica just said on the radio, what I just heard on WSB. That's what you want. And I got a lot from the radio thing, and you absolutely nailed it with community. Local radio was good for community, but this podcasting, after my move, I have made more friends from meetups than I made, like even at my kids' school and stuff. Like it's just where you find like-minded people, and it's great. You can trust them.
Yeah.
I just love that.
We just moved to the Tampa area, and the only people I know here are people that are fans of my podcasting.
Oh, that's
like,
great.
Those are the people I connected with first, and it was so easy. You know?
That's a community, and you can trust them. And I really appreciate that. And I feel like if all the things that podcasting does, it's like the eBay of, thoughts and spirit, like you can find in the pile of, junk, like that thing that is your treasure. And I just feel like that's one thing that's a cost. That's a cost to the system that gave us the internet as a limited hangout. Like that's the biggest part of the hangout is these connections, which keep us human, in this technifying world.
Yeah, well, you use a term right there, and it's a term that I learned from you, and I'm pretty sure that's because I believe you coined the term limited hangout. So can you describe exactly what a limited hangout is, and then maybe we can look at some possible current examples?
Thank you. I did not coin it, but
you didn't. Okay, well, I first heard it from you. Let's put it that way.
Yes, for sure. It's definitely popularized, and that was one thing I would do on the radio is like I would bring these ideas like PSYOP. That was something that nobody heard of. Black PSYOP, gray, white. So the limited hangout, perfect example is Edward Snowden. So, and in the beginning,
I actually use you as research because I don't know if you saw about a year and a little more than a year ago, I did a debate against Eric Brakey where I argued that Edward Snowden's revelations, I don't remember the exact premise, but he was the pro Snowden and I was maybe we should be suspicious of this whole thing.
And I would get so much hostility from libertarians when Edward Snowden came out because within about a week, I have to credit who was called American Everyman at the time. Now he's Nomadic Everyman after he got taken off the his WordPress site. But he got it right away. But after about a week, I was like, this guy's fake. Because I'm not asking you to own that, but that was my opinion. And I think the Joe Rogan stuff made it pretty clear that he's just in a can. But because first of all, he just got too much airtime. That's just never going to happen from a real problem. And then I had been following RT used to be a lot better than it is now, but RT was great back in the day. And I was following all these revelations that Edward Snowden eventually gave to the world. But at the time, they were all out there already. They were all out there. So in the beginning, his revelations, I had a compilation of, and I lost my WordPress site, so I don't think I can identify it now. Probably.
And by lost your WordPress site, you mean they like wiped it from you at some point, right?
Yes, they tricked me. And then they took it down. I'm happy to tell you about that in a sec. Sure. But I wrote all this stuff about I linked to all the articles that had every single solitary thing he said. My premise was that he did not come out with a single solitary thing that was new, nothing, zero. And if he really was tapped into secret information about the surveillance state, it would be of a tech of the future. It would be 10 years from now, or even 1 year from now. We've already outpaced anything that he talked about. So of what value is that? And it was not authentic, because if it was secret, it definitely was going to have some like, wow, this is coming. Like they're going to read your mind, and then you're going to get a Quora answer from something you didn't even Google yet. Like there's going to be stuff like that. And he just didn't show anything like that. And there were other things that were highly suspicious about him. And you can see later he won an Oscar for footage that was not consistent with the original story. Like supposedly he was in contact with
Oscar
journalists. Yes, for like Citizen 9 or something. Like
that's almost like they're waving it in front of you, like best actor. Great job.
That's too much. Yeah, I mean, so that was something when I was doing research on PSYOPs, they would start with a PSYOP, and if it did great, they could morph the story and extend it in ways that maybe they didn't think of before. So when his story started changing, little details about his upbringing and stuff would change. I feel like that's classic PSYOP. But the limited hangout element is they will give you a lot of information about something that doesn't make them, meaning let's just say the government, military intelligence, the surveillance state, however, in this case, the them is, they will give you as much information as you need. They need to give you to establish credibility. And then they will use that to achieve a more important goal. So they'll take that hit, but then so in this case, when it first came out, I was like, okay, there's a goal here. And I said, if you listen carefully to his words, what he was saying, he implied or said that he was a Ron Paul supporter, but no Ron Paul supporter would have said it this way. He said, I'm not saying we shouldn't have this kind of surveillance. I'm saying we need to have the conversation and it's illegal. And I was like, okay, what are they going to do? They're going to legalize it. They're going to legalize all of this. And I hate to say it, and I really hesitate to say it, but I remember Rand Paul was instrumental in getting the Freedom Act, like Freedom Act USA or whatever it's called.
I think it was USA Freedom Act.
Yeah, USA Freedom Act. That was the thing that codified all the stuff he said was not included in the USA Patriot Act that they were doing. And then, so it was like, I think it was like 2 years to the day, they achieved that. And so he was a hangout. He said a lot of bad stuff that people could point to. What has changed? It's only gotten worse.
So a hangout is basically someone that's intentionally sort of put out there as like a whistleblower or a hero of some kind with real, credible, verifiable information, which gives the credibility of it being true. And then I guess the limit is you don't know that this was all part of a psychological operation in some way.
They don't give you everything, and they'll use it for some other thing. Like, I'm waiting for the shoe to drop on Tucker Carlson. Like, he's going to advocate something bad, or he's there as a hangout so that he can corral people and they won't go beyond the parameters. Or like with Julian Assange, see, I think he is one too. So
really?
So yeah. Okay. So I feel like, because, and here's a good question. If Julian Assange didn't exist, the CIA would have to create him. There has to be a honeypot. And there was one, like Cryptome or Cryptagon or whatever. There was a guy who was actually doing it, and you would just dump directly your whistleblowing onto his website and he would not curate it. But Julian Assange curates it and he owns it. Once you give it to him, he can choose to release it or not. And I feel like it's like, God, if he didn't exist, you'd have to invent him. If there weren't some, the CIA has to attract whistleblowers. It has to. So I feel like that's Assange. She might not know it. I think he does.
Well, that was my other question. Does a limited hangout have to know they are a limited hangout? Could they actually just be doing what they're doing on purpose and thinking they're doing something noble when they are being used by other people?
Yeah, like I wonder about Kanye. Like, what is he up to? He clearly has a handler. Is he playing a role, or did they just find somebody, to be a patsy who had a specific psychological profile, who would be prone to it, who could be manipulated? The thing with like Assange, I think Assange gave his lawyer to Edward Snowden. And, there's just a lot of stuff between those two that I just don't think is real. But with Kanye, I really don't know. Even Alex Jones, I mean, he discredits a lot of things that by his behavior and persona that should have credit. I remember when he was on Piers Morgan jumping up and down about gun control. I was like, the Larry Pratt interview, which is that Gun Owners of America guy, like that was fantastic. But
it's the CNN test sometimes for me too. It's like, is CNN showing it to me? If why? It's not because they're pro Alex Jones, Jones, or because they're against the spying. Like even the first day of the Snowden revelations, I remember seeing it on CNN, and even then I was like, that's shocking. And then I was also like, why is it on CNN? I was like, something isn't quite right here.
That's a great test. And I think that I also think that there's this stuff in the alternative space. I do believe that there's plenty of that in the alternative. They have to, but it exists in sub MSM, whatever ecosystem. I hate that.
Let's dig into Assange a little bit more, because like for Snowden's actually a pretty easy one for me, especially hearing that Rogan interview and you breaking him down. Like, I mean, there was like 8 different. First of all, if you just watch it, you can just use instinct and forget everything else, because to me it just doesn't look right at all. But whatever, not everybody maybe has that same kind of instinct. But to me, Snowden is off doing something. He's like advocating for vaccines from afar. Like, okay, I can buy that he's just an op. But with Assange, so then you have him being locked in the embassy, you have him being imprisoned. Is that all part of the op? Is that even happening? Like, these are the questions I ask. I'm not saying the answer either, but
I mean, I have my these theories get really out there. So it's just
you're in the right place. This is a whole new world.
Okay, great. So if you look at Assange, has a weird history. Like, I think he grew up in a cult kind of atmosphere, and I think there was a picture of him. I believe it was Jane Mansfield or some Jean Harlow, maybe, that he was a drag queen of one of these super blonde bombshells from the mid 20th century. There's a picture of him, which I can't find it now. I used to have it all, but I can't find it now. And I was like, oh, this guy looks great in drag. Like, he really, really does. And I wonder sometimes if that he really wasn't in the embassy the whole time, but would sneak out, dressed as a woman or something in some kind of disguise. Like Edward Snowden alluded to being in a little bit of a disguise also. So his story, and he has some really weird pictures, what look like amateurish pictures that you would put, in the back of a, GQ or something to solicit. Like, it was really, really weird, his younger pictures. So I wonder sometimes if these guys can be hidden in plain sight, if they, are not trans, but maybe happy to dress like a woman, because he said, even Snowden said on the Joe Rogan thing, like, I'll be walking around and like only my eyes will be showing and someone will still recognize me. And I noticed with Snowden, like, his look is always the same. He always has that same haircut. He always has the same glasses. Like, it's like he doesn't want you to understand any variation of his appearance, because he probably... It's
like, this is the Edward Snowden costume.
Yes, exactly. Because I don't think he's in Russia. I'm not sure he ever was in Russia. Putin plays along, but I don't think he was ever in Russia. And like with Assange, so he has a beard. Like, nowadays,
I think he's just living alone in some CIA dungeon, and just once in a while he has to go do a Zoom call to, make some appearance.
I mean, now with the beard, it is a little, I don't have a good theory of, where he's living, what he's allowed to do. And I don't dig into him too deeply, but I just feel like if he, and I also say, like, what did come of it? Just like Snowden, like, what has ever come of Assange? Now someone I think is absolutely real is Ross Ulbricht. Like, that, people should be getting him out of jail. And I almost wonder if they have Assange as a way to drown out the injustice of poor Ross Ulbricht's incarceration.
Well, let's try to bring all this and tie it into some current events. You mentioned you did a deep dive on FTX, and part of me even wonders if a limited hangout could be like a villainous character, like a Sam Bankman-Friedman, where it's like, here's the villain, look at him, he looks kind of squirrely, that's the guy that did it all, let's go put. And then meanwhile, there's obviously much more powerful people that are behind all this than this, like, half retarded Jufro guy.
I definitely have my theories about him, and it's a little complicated because I went to Stanford Law School and I had his father as a professor, and I didn't really? I don't think I had a
Mr. Bankman.
Yeah.
Wow,
Mr. Bankman.
Really?
Yeah, and I really liked him. He was good. He was the crim professor for like the first year stuff, and I totally liked him. I had I couldn't believe that he'd be involved in any of this stuff. And so I started looking into it a little more deeply, because at first it just looks like a complete psyop to me, and just designed to make crypto regulated. But I just couldn't believe that those guys would be in on that. And I dug a little deeper, and it seems like they had really devoted to this, like their sort of ethics. So they call it utilitarianism. And then Sam Bankman-Fried became involved in effective altruism. So they have this like morality that could justify something like this. Like, we don't care what other people think. Like, that's part of our, humble approach to doing good for the world. So we will take this hit. And what we'll do is we will facilitate the problem that will cause the regulation before a real problem happens and causes contagion or a lot of losses. So I feel like the losses are being really overblown because there's no accounting. There's no accounting. So all you're hearing about these losses is the John J. Ray, or whatever his name is, the Enron guy, now runs FTX in a restructuring environment, Chapter 11. He says it was 100 corporations had to go into Chapter 11. He's really trying to do forensics on the numbers. And then you have SBF saying nobody who was at the FTX USA company, which would be legal for Americans to invest in, will lose money. Like, he keeps saying that if they don't fuck this up, they will not lose money. However, people in the international thing, I don't know, it's hard to deal with other countries. And, I keep waiting for them to say, like, there's going to be, we need an international regulatory regime, whatever. And he's said a couple of times, which I absolutely picked up on, any Americans who were investing in FTX International would be breaking laws. And, so I'm thinking, okay, they're protecting the FTX USA people, according to the laws here. And the international people, they don't have a lot of sympathy for because they were lying and skirting laws. So I feel like also these tremendous margin positions that people were permitted to take probably are exaggerating the magnitude of the losses that they're talking about. And, it's complicated by a couple of things. There's a lot of VC, like real capital in there. But on the other hand, like if you look at the numbers, the dollars that are being accounted for, like making contributions somewhere, investment somewhere, a Super Bowl ad or naming rights in Miami, like that kind of squares up with some of the real money that came in from the VCs. And I don't know if they would be in on it, or because they're in the US, maybe they'll get their money back. I don't know how that's going to work. But I also look at the fact that his parents were law professors, and her, Caroline Ellison, the Alameda one, his like partner in crime.
Oh, the really creepy looking, like,
yes,
Dorothy girl.
She's wearing her Caroline Ellison costume. Like if you, you can't find a picture of that, they look like literally like dressed like a nerd day. Like that's what it looks like. Yeah. And she has this weird interview in the Bahamas where she's just like, guy, like I learned this math in second grade. It's just
she reminds me of the girl that they pretend to tell us like did all the code for the moon landing, and she's like standing next to the stack of papers. Have you seen that one?
Oh no, I haven't. But yeah,
she looks exactly like that girl. There's a picture from the 60s where like, oh, here's I don't remember the name, but like Dorothy Smith, who wrote all the code for the moon landing. Unfortunately, we lost it, but it's standing next to a stack of papers. Looks a lot like that girl.
Well, I think they do take pictures like that they know are authentic, and they replicate them, and they just figure out what's going to seem right to you. Maybe tap on an image that you already have in your mind, like almost archetypally. Right. And I feel like that's what they did with her. But her parents are both economics professors at MIT, and her father is the head of the economics department. And at one point, and this is true for so many people in this story, Gary Gensler, the head of the SEC, taught a class there on like crypto regulation, and he would perforce report to Caroline Ellison's father. So there's the fact that these kids are in this deep without any kind of financial regulation, tax. The father, Bankman, is a tax specialist, as well as got a degree in clinical psychology. And you hear a lot of that psychobabble coming out of SBF's mouth. So I think that the twist with all of that is they're going to say, and SBF actually referred to long-term capital management in his prepared testimony for Congress today. Now, he was arrested this morning in the Bahamas, so he's not able to testify before Congress.
How convenient.
Which means he does not have this opportunity to perjure himself or have to answer questions. Lucky him. But he actually mentioned long-term capital management, and the book about that, which was the failure, I think, because they overinvested in Russian bonds, and then Russia declared default or defaulted on the bonds in the 90s. So the book about that is called The Smartest Guys in the Room. And the idea is the smartest guys in the room can cause a spectacular failure that has terrible contagion. And I feel like this is an echo of that. And if these kids, these little phenoms, we're not talking about the little whippersnappers of Zuckerberg and, Musk and Gates, these guys who came, dropped out of high school and started a company in their garage. Like that's like the old school. We're talking, and those people also can't possibly be the dropout garage dwellers who testify before Congress and run some of the biggest companies in the world. Like there is no way a brain has the capacity to do all of those things, much less all 10 of the guys in charge of the biggest tech companies in the world. But what I think they'll do with this is they'll say, if these guys who are typical snot-nosed billionaires who have this kind of firepower behind them, the greatest minds of law, tax, economics, an SEC regulator on, the head of the SEC is 1 degree of separation, then if they can't do it, no one can. And we need to, the big message here is transparency in crypto. They want the information. They need it to be non-anonymous. And they even said today in Congress, this John J. Ray said that we can find out where all the crypto went, and we will. Like, we can trace it all, and that's because somebody hacked in and stole a bunch of it, whatever. But it just seems to me very, very much a setup. And I mean, I don't know if this kid is going to go to jail or it's going to look like he went to jail. My guess is,
are we going to be hashtagging SBF didn't kill himself soon?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. I know people say that, but I think that what they're going to say, I think he's going to get away with it. And the message that he will deliver is, I should be in jail, but the laws are not there for that. So let's put them there.
Ah, interesting. So do you think that this entire FPX, I was combining FTX and SBF into one term there. This entire thing is maybe just a giant, I mean, it's really the first like public crypto related scandal other than just the price going down or something like that, and I wonder, you look at this thing, like you said, the Super Bowl ad, this guy's hanging out with like Tom Brady. Like, is there a reason so much attention was put on this with tying it into celebrities, all this stuff where, yes, people had heard of FTX not long before all this thing came down. So you think that's all intentional?
I think they hyped it all on purpose, and it's really telling to see Larry David's ad where he says, I don't believe it, I'm not buying it. That's his ad. Like, his ad was sarcasm. And now they get to say Larry David was right. Like, he was fully protected. So I just feel like, yes, that the really naming rights, all that stuff, I think it was designed to make this very, very public. And that's why you don't see any numbers, because I think that it's being totally exaggerated.
Interesting. So do you think that this could be leading to, obviously they want crypto regulation. They want to put KYC on everything. So you can't, they always know where your money is or what have you. Do you think this could also be part of what they do for making the case for bringing the CBDC in? Because now they can say, well, look, the technology is great. It's fantastic, but it's the Wild West out there. Look at what just happened. But if we control it, if we put it under the central bank, it's going to be spectacular.
Yeah, I totally think so. And when you started seeing banks, and I don't know what companies they've been talking about, when you start seeing them bring in, like, make big capital investments to accommodate crypto, like, I knew it's going to be there. Digital currency is going to be there. And I've always just wondered, does it fold Bitcoin in? Or because Bitcoin is of limited quantity, maybe it's some kind of like gold reserve, what are they going to do with that? But it looked to me like crypto was definitely part of the program, and I've always thought this since day one. I mean, I remember literally like the first time I even heard of it, it was like, oh, that's a stepping stone to a cashless society. Like, obviously that's what's going on here. And I feel like that's definitely what's going on. I don't know how they're going to fold in existing crypto. Maybe everything will go away except for Bitcoin. Maybe they'll incorporate it, but I feel like that's 100%. And we're a little behind on the CBDC, but what is first on experimenting with the digital currency, I believe, was El Salvador. And in this research, I noticed that Mr. Bankman, who I did really respect, and I don't want to say anything negative about him, but he was born in El Salvador, which I did not know. And I thought that was kind of weird.
Tie-in. I mean, not as weird as the fact that his name is Bankman. But
I know. And then Fried, I mean, it's Freed, but I know. And the Barbara Freed's sister is a health person at the World Economic Forum. And SBF's brother, Gabe, ran like a nonprofit to promote vaccines, and which also discredited ivermectin, and FTX gave a lot of money to that. And I mean, but I thought what was interesting was I really feel like there is some underlying ethics in their minds of what's going on here. And that's why I feel like they're not screwing over. I just don't think they're going to bankrupt law-abiding citizens. I would suspect that FTX USA they are made whole, the individual customers.
As long as Tom Brady gets his millions back, I'll be happy. Someone else I'd like to talk about, because he's someone that's really come into the forefront as like a a right wing or a libertarian like white knight, and as of late, and that is Mr. Elon Musk, someone you've talked about quite a bit. And he's certainly on the surface level. Like if I just put myself in the purely not trying to look beyond things level, I would be like, yeah, he's doing stuff I like. I like that thing he said. I like this thing he said. And then I look at the bigger picture and I am very suspicious. So I'd like to just know kind of your thoughts on this whole Musk thing.
Well, I've dug into basically every huge tech guy, like big tech billionaire, whatever, and all the Americans I found like 1 degree of separation from military intelligence. It's just 1 degree from the deep state in every single case. I think the furthest away was Bezos, whose grandfather was a high muckety muck in the like atomic energy, whatever commission, which was closely tied to the defense industry. So like
sounds close enough. Maybe that's 2 degrees.
And he used to spend his summers with him. Like, so they had a close relationship. The only one I couldn't find was Steve Jobs, but I did find that his actual birth father was a CIA agent in Syria. So,
wow.
So, I mean, and I like, maybe he didn't have a relationship with him, but I was just like, okay, that was the one that was missing link. So, but with Elon Musk, he's South African. I have not been able to get like the real smoking gun about him, except for his very weird father and family. Someone sent me an article. And I just can't find it, but I think someone did the work on him to prove it. But, by their deeds, you shall know them. A couple of things with him is.
What is his family background, by the way? You touched on that recently because I don't know anything about that.
I believe his mother was English, his father South African, but they did get rich with some. I mean, I'm really reaching now, gems or mines of some kind.
Oh yeah. I had seen something
always
about that
super,
as well.
It's obviously highly connected to the authorities.
Right.
You can't really get rich that way with that. But the father was like a skivats. He impregnated his stepdaughter, I think. Like, bleh. So that's very skeevy. So Elon's half sister is also, like his half niece, his half niece. It's so disgusting.
That's
so
odd.
well.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say it's disgusting. I'm sure the girl's nice. It's not
Right.
incest or whatever. But and I believe he has a half sister that they won't own with all this money, like another half sister who looks just like him. And it's like she's like, come on, I don't even want your money. Just come on. And they're just like, I don't know, I never saw this girl. So it's just, I don't like that stuff's kind of gross. But no, I haven't been able to crack the code to make the connections, but I think they are out there. But the things that he's done that like reveal to me that there's something going on, it's like when he was tweeting stuff that costs shareholders real money. I mean, that is such a profound violation of SEC rules. Like you would get seriously in trouble. Like you would not live to tweet another day. Now he bought Twitter, but before that, they should have even arranged the story. Like Twitter banned me because I said those things, and now I'm buying it out of revenge. Maybe that is part of his story. I don't know. But I just felt like there should be repercussions for this stuff. It isn't the Wild West. The stuff is, and same thing with SBF, like the SEC and the commodities exchanges do actually regulate crypto. They assert the authority to regulate it, and he abided by those regulations. So Elon gets away with stuff that normal people would not get away with, in my opinion. And I have to say, my Twitter experience has gotten worse since he took over. Now,
really?
I don't know. Yeah.
How so?
A few ways. One is I started a Twitter account for Deep Dives, my new show, and it was suspended permanently like two tweets in. And I was wondering if it was like what happened to Darren at Grimerica, that like any device he uses gets, any account that he establishes from any device gets immediately suspended because they hate him.
Because they flagged him as a person. Yeah.
Yes. But my Twitter account, I'm very careful not to be rude. So I feel like people who get a little hot are the ones where they will ban you, but I haven't done anything to like justify that, but I tweet plenty of stuff about COVID and stuff. Anyway, so they took me down and then they restored it after I complained. But the other thing that happened was I'm starting to get Billy Sampson.
He gets fired up about your account being
He's
suspended.
mad.
So
He's mad at my Twitter thing. So then I've also gotten a lot of like, this tweet might trigger people. I got a great one the other day. I was tweeting about Lockerbie. Like they arrested somebody in Lockerbie. And I'm like, does anyone not know that this was the CIA? Like some people still think this is Libya.
I feel like they arrest someone for that every decade. They're like, right. Oh, you got the real guy now,
well,
everyone.
The other guy is dying, so they need to keep that going. So I tweeted this BBC article and I said like, it's false flag. We should cover this. And that got flagged. But I just tweeted the article itself and it did not get flagged. And then I tried to tweet an article that had an opposing view and that would not even tweet. It didn't even say, it's just like something's wrong with your account right now. And I was like, I could be that article. You know, it was just because I started using Yandex.com. Have you heard of Yandex?
No.
Yandex.com. It's like Russian Google and you can just Google stuff and actual answers come
and actually find it and not like
it's amazing. So I find all this stuff but you can't tweet any of it. So so I've just noticed those little things, but I was on a show yesterday, Union of the Unwanted, with Ronnie. Yeah. Is it Snellman? He's from Finland. And he was pointing out that Musk wants to kind of turn Twitter into WeChat, which I have WhatsApp. I don't know what WeChat is. It's the Chinese kind of like all pervasive surveillance thing, I think. Yeah. And that he wants people to come back to Twitter because he needs everybody.
He says that in a clip. Yeah. There's video of him saying that. He's like, oh yeah, we just basically make it WeChat, but better.
Yeah. So maybe he does want people to come back because he wants it to be absolutely all inclusive, like Facebook, basically. So I don't know, but my personal experience has not been better. And I know a lot of people haven't been restored yet, but so I don't know. I mean, I don't know, but I definitely, as Ian Davis said the other day, I was listening to him, talking to him actually, and he said, like, what is Musk in on? He's in on the electric car thing. So like you have no getaway because driverless cars, like you're not going to own a driverless car. Like you're no longer going to have that autonomy. He does that and it's government subsidized. He's doing SpaceX because somebody's got to land on the moon.
That's the one that almost like, if nothing else was going on, the fact that you've seen the clip where he says, it's real because it looks so fake, about the car that supposedly he put this Tesla that's supposedly just like orbiting the Earth. And there's a clip of him saying that. He's like, oh, it's real because it looks so fake.
Oh my gosh. Like, it works because you got so sick.
Yeah, it's kind of like that.
Well, I have to look at that. But he also has the Neuralink thing. And I remember the first time I suspected Musk. And I literally, it was like a 9/11 kind of thing where you're like, where were you? Like, I remember sitting in my kitchen in my old house and my husband was like, I wasn't as far down the rabbit hole at the time. My husband was like, wow, Elon Musk, he's super libertarian. And he just said like the one thing government really has to control is AI. And I was like, well, that could be like true, but it could be like he's a limited hangout. And that's that's where he's going to get you. Like, hey, me, I'm a total anarchist, but AI.
You can trust me. I put out the Twitter files. Like I'm doing all these things. To me, the Twitter files, like, yeah, they're nice right-wing, like red meat, I suppose. Right. But like, is he saying anything we all don't already know? No. And yes, it's good to get confirmation, I suppose, in the public eye. So you can even point to the evidence now or whatever. But stuff like that isn't changing a single person's mind. Either people blow it off as just part of the right-wing conspiracy, and now he's part of that right-wing conspiracy, or we already knew it. So there's really no revelation.
And with that, to me, all of that, as well as Hunter's laptop, all of that is a massive distraction from what appears to me. Now, other people are saying this, and I will give Peter Schweitzer credit for it for the first time I ever read this. But when I dug into Ukraine and everything else, like it was crystal clear. The amount of corruption in the Joe Biden, world from, I don't know how far back it goes, but as far as Ukraine goes.
Back to Corn Pop, I would imagine.
What is corn? What is that?
It's this weird. You'd have to look up the clip. It's just a weird story that Joe Biden was telling from about this guy named Corn Pop that he knew when he was younger.
Right.
It's a Joe Biden weird crazy story thing that kind of
totally
became a meme.
weird.
Yeah.
So he has all these things, and he did go back and say he wrote the USA Patriot Act for OKC. So he was around. So he knows where the bodies are buried. He's in on all that stuff. But the level of corruption from Ukraine and China, all flowing through these different companies that Jim, his brother, and Hunter, his son, are absolutely 100% his beards for. Like their job is to keep those assets in their name because they are the only ones he trusts. And I'm sure he's their beneficiary and vice versa, whatever. But that corporation, it is Hunter Biden. It's Devin Archer, who's a bit of a, like, he's not to the manner born. And there's a whole long story about that. I won't get into it unless you want to. But then there's James Bulger the third. And I wonder if Whitey Bulger got killed just to make sure that he doesn't say anything about.
Is there a relation? Is Whitey Bulger?
Yes, his nephew.
Oh wow.
Yeah,
man,
and the father.
Everything is connected. It's just.
Oh
it's
yeah,
wild.
no, that and Mueller was the Boston, the attorney general up there in Boston when all that shit was going down. It's crazy. And so it's Chris Hines, who's John Kerry's stepson. Those four people, Archer, Hines, Bulger, and Hunter Biden.
That's like some wild law firm.
Yeah. It's in a financial investing firm. And so when they were like, "Oh, Hunter draws a salary from Burisma," I'm like, "It's not the salary; it's the $1 billion in IMF funding that's disappearing." And it's their connections to the Privat Bank, which was worth billions and went under.
Do you think even something like the laptop is like a limited hangout? It's like, oh, look how terrible this guy is because he's smoking crack with like young girls or whatever. When it's really not. That's not really what matters.
I invented a word for it called salacious haystacking.
Okay, that one you definitely coined. So
yes, I definitely.
I'm going to give you one credit for that one. That's a good one.
So it's when you want to pile a bunch of sexy,
salacious
gross
haystacking.
Stuff,
that's an awesome term. I like that.
And not find the needle, which is the corruption. So
right. So you'll see scandals, sex scandals, stuff that gets headlines, but all of that hay keeps you from finding the actual needle, which is the actual,
which is the corruption.
Yeah.
Right. So he's got a lot of emails in there. And the original New York Post article, which was banned by Twitter, was about the corruption. And then they continued to ban the New York Post for 2 weeks. However, they let other people report on that on the laptop, and the stories were just all about sex, drugs, and underage girls. It was not about the corruption. And so now we're talking about anytime they really focus on process. So the Twitter files show the process of banning someone. I always feel like that's a massive distraction. It's a cover up from the underlying crime. What is the underlying crime here? And it's not even banning somebody. It's like, why did you ban them? Like you were really trying to suppress that information, and the focus is on the process more than anything else now. And so I think, but the Biden corruption is like just staggering and ongoing, in my opinion.
I'm curious, just one distinction I want to make is that, we talk about limited hangouts, and then there's also this concept of created persons, which is like a slightly different thing. Would you put Elon Musk? Well, like you said, you don't know. You haven't gotten to the bottom of it, but instinctually.
No, I would, for sure.
Okay. So you think he would be like more like a created person, which is someone that's sort of invented out of the blue to serve a specific purpose, which might be different than someone who is limited hangout that's just sort of hung out there for a moment in time.
Totally. So you can be a limited hangout and not know it, for sure. I don't think you can be a created person and not know it. And I feel like the people who are the best candidates for created persons are people who were identified young. If you can go back in their public history and find some connection when they're teenagers, like James Comey. James Comey has cost the government millions of dollars and the bad things he's done. But it started when he was a teenager and he testified or fingered or whatever the New Jersey Ramsey rapist. And that guy was not guilty. And he went to jail. Ultimately he was exonerated. They sued the government to the tune of a couple $1 million. Comey was also, so when Comey was like 17, I really feel like he's a sociopathic liar. And they identified him. Like the FBI was like, we could use a kid like this. I don't know.
So not that he was already an asset then, but it's like almost like, oh, this guy fits the profile. We know that this guy's we can use someone like this for bad stuff.
Yeah, and then he went and he and Mueller, I think, in the anthrax thing, they fingered the wrong person again, costing taxpayers millions of dollars. Stuff that went on in Boston cost taxpayers millions of dollars because it's malfeasance. Fidel Castro wrote a letter to FDR in the 30s, I think, like when he was 12 years old. And I feel like they identified, like, I think he said something like, I love America and I will do anything you ask. And please send me $1, something like that. And I feel like they're like, oh yeah, that guy. And Stacey Abrams, she went to a summer program, a Telluride program. And I think it's for people of color. And that's when I realized that they identify and lift up. And I think AOC was like this. They take people of color, not because they want to give them a hand up, but because they need a front person. As Stacey Abrams herself says, you can tell by looking at me that I can be trusted. And then there's this other program, the Center for Talented Youth at Johns Hopkins, which used to identify itself as studying hyper intelligent kids. Now I think it's about promoting them and fostering them. It used to be about studying them. People who were in that, Zuckerberg, Brin, Lady Gaga, the guy behind Quora. And I only discovered that because
they were all in the same Johns Hopkins study.
Yeah, in the summer program, it's called the Center for Talented Youth, which now I believe they promote as like math camp or whatever. But it used to be clear it was psychological study, and I only found that because Zuckerberg was transferred to Exeter as a junior. Do you know what Phillips Exeter is like the #1 high school in the country? Like, it just. I transferred to Harvard as a junior, and I was like, I don't believe anybody transfers to Exeter as a junior. And he did. I was like, what was that? And I think it was a classics major because I was watching him testify in front of Congress. And I'm like, this is a math geek. His recall of details is up there with like a history professor, and that's what CIA looks for is recall because they don't want you to write stuff down. So they look for history people.
And they need it to be perfect because your story, preferably won't change. Ever.
Yes. And linguistics they like. So if you're a Russian major, I'll always look and see if you made that connection. But I was like, this guy doesn't pass the sniff test. So I would say Zuckerberg, all those guys in the Johns
Lady
Hopkins
Gaga
thing.
For sure. That just rings true in every way.
And her story doesn't really make. She's like, oh, nobody believed in me. I'm like, you were identified as like a 12-year-old. They have to get a 1200 on the SATs at the age of 12.
Wow.
Which I mean, some people, that'd be pretty hard to get at the age of 20. Maybe not anymore, but
what about more any historical examples you can think of? I've been on like a kick recently. The one I got into recently, which was like once I don't know, I could be wrong, but when I got into I got on a Helen Keller kick recently, and I was just like, and it's like as soon as someone said it, I was like, oh yeah, that's obviously fake. How could that have ever happened? I'm not saying it was, but I'm saying it feels weird because you look at her and you hear the story, and you grow up hearing the story. Like since you're like a 5, you hear the story of Helen Keller. But it's not just that she was deaf and blind but could still somehow go out and function in the world. She was deaf and blind and wrote books and had strong political opinions. Right. that's the part I'm like, okay, you're telling me you're like, but you need to raise taxes and we need the Disabilities Act. Like that's the part that I'm like, Hawking, Hawking's
right. I mean, is that not obvious? Like
Hawking's perfect because who knows what he's typing in that thing? Like he could just be he could just be an actual vegetable who's just going around,
Yeah, I mean, we have absolutely no idea. We'll never know. Another one, and I hate to do this because it sounds so bad, but Giffords, the one who was brain damaged from the woman.
Oh, yeah. Gabby Giffords?
Yes.
Or is that, yeah.
Yeah, she can't, when she's interviewed, she really can't put she could put 2 words together, but she can't write extensive editorial. Well, they claim that her interface, like live, is impaired, but that her brain functioning is not. So she can write these really elaborate New York Times articles.
About gun control, always, right?
And I don't believe that, but I hate to say it because, she's a human being and I think she's being exploited, or maybe I'm a cynical asshole and I'm wrong.
There's a range of possibilities here.
It's definitely, I mean, both things could be true. It could be cynical asshole too. But so If you want to talk about historical examples, I thought something was really funny. I was in the Wikipedia entry for the expression Nero fiddles while Rome burns.
Hmm.
So that apparently was because contemporary reports at the time said that Rome itself, like the Roman government, burned Rome, that they had put the fire out, it popped up again in different places, and it went on for 6 days, but the people on the ground kept putting it out, and it kept like reigniting. And then at the end of it all, they started the persecution of the Christians. They blamed Christians on the fire. I don't even know, what were Christians doing to make the fire, but in Wikipedia, it says, it literally tries to debunk these conspiracy theories, which are like
Wow.
2,000 years old. It's like,
Wow.
what? These are historical documents. Like, shut the fuck up.
It is true. Like for me, it's been like, I was already sort of always in this realm. And then, the couple 3 years of COVID when you could see the lies in real time. And it was just so obvious that I could no longer even, I couldn't even keep that seed of doubt. Like maybe I'm just being crazy thinking some of this stuff. So, but then when you see it in real time for the modern day, you start to zoom out and you start to see like, okay, well maybe Stephen Hawking was a weird thing too. But if I can't even believe the real time, then how can I believe? Well, first you start with like the more modern times. Then you're like, how can I believe history? Then you're like, all right, Nero. Can I believe Mozart? Like Shakespeare? Like it never ends.
You should read Against the Grain. It's about the agricultural revolution, and that we had domesticated plants and animals for 4,000 years before we went agricultural. And the agricultural revolution was a tax and slavery thing where a power center grew up and came and said, okay, now we're going to put all this effort into grain because grain will harvest all at once. We can tax it. Whereas prior to that, the people were supposedly living large in a kind of permaculture environment where you'd focus on tubers and stuff that you can harvest that can stay in the ground for a really long time. Just redirect the migration of animals so that they would kind of walk past you and you could kill what you needed when the time came for 4,000 years. So you can go back and say like the very foundations of civilization are based on tax slavery.
Wow. Well, Monica, I can tell. I'll have to look into that book. That does sound really interesting. But I can tell we're starting to heat up and get into the weird zone. So maybe this is a good time to wrap the show. I know you're going to stick around with me, hop into the smoke-filled room. But why don't you just take one more shot at letting everybody know where they can find everything you're doing out there? Obviously, the main show, Deep Dives with Monica Perez. But any ways they can also contact you, support you, etc.
Thank you so much. So, yes, Deep Dives with Monica Perez on your favorite podcasting platform, trying to keep that very high quality. So hopefully you'll enjoy everything you find there, which is my solo stuff when I dive into a topic, but also Dive Master interviews, some great buddy dives. If you will allow, I will include this on that feed.
Certainly.
I can always be reached at Monica Perez Show on Twitter. I try to answer every tweet that I get. I really love to engage on Twitter in the evenings. And then I have a website, monicasdeepdives.com, which I'm trying to repopulate with my archives from when WordPress took me down and set me up. I can tell you about that. And I can also tell you about why I think dinosaurs are fake in the after show.
That sounds like a great teaser. I think we can get into all that stuff. So Monica, thank you so much. I appreciate you coming on and joining me. Thanks for coming on my show.
Thank you so much.